the previous exercise, we looked at a multi-container Docker app where we had one container running the Express server and a second one running the MongoDB server, and the two were communicating over a user-created network. Now, when we launched that application, we first had to manually create a new network bridge. Then we launched the MongoDB container and attached it to the network bridge. Then we launched the Express server container and then connected it to the network bridge, and thereby the two containers started communicating and the application started running. Now, shouldn't there be an automated way of achieving exactly the same thing? Fortunately for us, the Docker suite contains exactly a tool for this purpose called Docker Compose. We define the configuration for the multi-container application in a configuration file which is written in the YAML language. YAML standing for YAML Ain't Markup Language, which is a straightforward way of expressing the various services that make up your multi-container application. Let's go ahead and configure the YAML file in this exercise to launch the multi-container application. Fortunately, we already have downloaded the images corresponding to the Express server and the MongoDB server, so it is a very straightforward and a simple way of configuring the multi-container application and launch it using Docker Compose. Going to the terminal, in the Docker folder, let me create a folder named Simple Express App and then move to the Simple Express App. Then I'm going to create a file here named docker-compose.yml, which contains the configuration for my application. So let me go ahead and open a text editor. I'm going to use Visual Studio Code in this case. And once the editor opens, I'm going to create the file here named docker-compose.yml. In the Docker Compose file, the first line will specify the version of the Docker Compose that we are using, 3.7 in this case. Then after that, we will configure the services that are going to form part of this application. There are going to be two services, or rather two containers here. The first one is the Express server container, and the second one is the MongoDB container. The names here have significance because these names are going to be used by the containers themselves in there in order to address the corresponding other container that you are trying to access. So the Express server will try to access the MongoDB container as MongoDB:27017, as we would expect. Now, for the MongoDB container, we already have the image from which we are launching the MongoDB server. So the image that we have already downloaded in the previous exercise. So we're going to use that to launch the MongoDB container. For the Express server, also we have the corresponding image that we are going to use as the basis for launching the Express container. Now, in addition, this server is going to expose ports number 3000, and which will map it to the host port here. Also, the Express server will try and connect to the MongoDB server running in the MongoDB container. So we want the Express server to be to wait until the MongoDB server is up and running. So that dependency can be defined by defining a depends on MongoDB. So this specifies that this Express Server container should be launched after the MongoDB container is launched. So the order of launch can be specified by doing this. If we don't, then both the containers will automatically launch together, and the Express Server container will try to connect to the MongoDB server even before it is ready. Now, in the previous exercise, we didn't run into this problem because the MongoDB server, we started it first, and then by the time we launched the Express Server, it was already a few minutes, so the MongoDB server was fully up and running and ready to receive the connection request from the Express Server. Now, in this case, since we launched them together, that depends on only checks to see whether the MongoDB container has been launched or not. It doesn't check to see whether the MongoDB server is ready to receive the connection from a request from the Express Server. So if we don't further take care of it, then it is quite possible that the Express Server may try to connect to the MongoDB server even before it is ready to receive the connection request, and thus the Express Server may fail to connect to the MongoDB server. So normally what we are advised to do is to use a script that will check to see that the MongoDB server is ready to receive the connection request. Now, for this purpose, there are a few scripts available. I'll discuss more about this in detail in the next video. But for the moment, let me go ahead and configure that. I have already included one such script into the Express Server image in the working directory. So I'm going to just make use of that. And so we can specify that by specifying a command here. Whatever we specify as a command in the Docker Compose configuration file will be the default command used when the Express Server launches. Now recall that when we configure the Docker file, in the Docker file, we would have specified the last item in there as cmd, which is the command that is going to be executed when the container launches. In this case, we can override that in the Docker Compose file by explicitly specifying a command here. And this command will take precedence over that. And this is the command that will be used to start up when the container is ready to run. So in this command, we will specify the script name that I have already included there. We'll say ./wait_for_it.shell. Now this shell script takes a few command line parameters, which I'm going to specify after this in the same command here. The second command line parameter it will take is which port and which server to check. So we'll specify MongoDB 27017. So it will keep checking this TCP port until it is ready for receiving the connection. Now, in addition, we need to specify what is the actual command that we will use when the Express Server launches. And remember that for a typical Express Server, we will be using npm start as the starting point. So that can be specified by saying ... within quotes, and then after that we will specify npm and start. So this will ensure that this shell script will run first and check to see whether the MongoDB server is willing to accept connections there. Once the server is ready to accept connections, then it will launch the npm start command and run the npm start command in the Express Server container there. So once we have finished configuring the Docker Compose file, let's go ahead and save the changes. We'll go to the terminal and then use the Docker Compose command to launch the multi-container application. Going to the terminal, we are still in the same folder where we created the docker compose.yml file. And now we can simply type docker compose up. The docker compose command will have been installed on your computer when you install the Docker Desktop or the Docker Toolbox. So it should be available for you at the command line. And when we say docker compose up, and then we'll run it in the background, so we'll say -d, so that the containers are run in the detached mode. Now, this command will by default use the docker compose.yml file that is included in this folder as the configuration script for launching the multi-container application. So let's go ahead and launch the multi-container application, and you would see that the first step, it creates a network with a name. So this automatically creates a user-defined bridge for you when you define the configuration file, and the name for the bridge will be the name of the folder in which your application exists, appended with _default here. So that'll be the name of the network file. So we don't need to explicitly create a user-defined network. That is automatically done for us. If you want to, you can control the name that is assigned to the network and so on. So we'll look at that in a later stage there. After that, it launches two containers here, the MongoDB container and the Express container. Now, if you open Docker Desktop or Docker or Kitematic, you should be able to see the two containers up and running in your Docker Desktop. You would notice that there is a single entry here, and when you click on the arrow there, you see that you have two containers running there. The first one is the MongoDB container, and the second one is the Express container. Looking at the logs for the Express container, you can see that the Express container has correctly connected to the MongoDB server. So let's go ahead and look at what this multi-container application is serving up in the browser. Going to the browser, let's type in localhost 3000, and you should be able to see the React application coming up on the browser tab there, serving up the contents of the React site here. So with this, we have seen in this exercise how we can launch a multi-container application using Docker Compose and defining the configuration in the Docker Compose YML file. You can now shut down the application by saying Docker Compose down, and the application will stop at this point, and also the default network that you have created will be removed from the list of networks. So if you say Docker network list, you won't see that default network that was created when the Docker Compose launched there. With this, we have seen a quick overview and a simple example of using Docker Compose and how to define the configuration in the YML file here. In the next video, we'll look at some of the concepts behind Docker Compose.